Good morning, everyone. It's Sharon Avery from the Toronto Foundation. As you're entering the room, we just like to say welcome. And please feel free, once you get settled and comfortable, to open up your chat and introduce yourself to everyone and send your morning greetings. Today's topic is around community culture and social cohesion. And so please say hello. You're with your neighbors and your friends in your community right now. We'll get started very soon. The room is filling up quickly, and we're going to let a few more people in before we get started. A reminder, on the left-hand side of your chat is the polls. It's got a red dot beside it. Please feel free to do your poll first thing. Those of you that have been here before know that our routine is let us know who you are through the poll. We like to keep track. We have another full house today and are really excited to talk about community culture and social cohesion. We'll start in about 30 seconds. I can see folks arriving and introducing themselves and the organizations they're from. About half the audience usually represents grassroots and small, medium-sized organizations through the city. Please feel free to do that. Don't hesitate to put a link up to your organization. The other half of the audience are funders and donors and Toronto Foundation fund holders. So please, they want to meet you. Introduce yourselves. Also, feel free to answer questions that any of you may put up in the chat. If others have the answers, we really invite you to share your knowledge. This is we have a great panel today, but many experts are also on this phone or also in the webinar group as well. So I think I'm going to get started because we have a very full agenda and we have a fantastic group with us. I'm going to introduce Zahra, Ajeev, Claire, and Utcha very soon. But I do want to sort of frame our conversation today and thank those of you that have been coming every other week for the last 8 webinars. We have all been in isolation together for nearly 2.5 months. And I have to admit to you that I really look forward to this hour together. I know it's 8 in the morning. I know it's early. But in a way, this has been a really powerful connecting experience for folks. And I can see over and over again in the chat, folks we see every week. And so for those of you that have been joining us consistently through this, welcome and thank you. This is part of our social cohesion commitment as Toronto Foundation. And for those of you that are new today and haven't been to a webinar before, I hope you really get a lot out of this. The whole point of us doing the Better Toronto Coalition and this webinar is to connect people together, to connect the sector who desperately needs funding at this time and are serving our most vulnerable populations and connecting them to funders and donors who really care and really want to do something. So we will have been successful with this webinar if you take action as a result. And some of that action can be big and some of it can be small, some of it's financial and some of it is voluntary. And so please use the chat line throughout our conversation today because we want you to connect with each other. It's the whole point. We always begin this conversation with an acknowledgement of gratitude to the first peoples that came before us and on the lands on which we work in Toronto, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and most recently Mississaugas of the Credit. You know, one of the consistent themes we've heard through our webinar series, we've had many Indigenous-led organizations join us, is the absence of personal face-to-face connectivity, which is so critical to their cultural practices, and how trying to do them online is better than nothing, but how much we just miss being together. I think as I look to our vital signs report back last year, we know a few things to be very true. First, that access to recreation and arts is often dependent on where you live in the city, with a particular divide between the downtown suburbs like Scarborough and Etobicoke. That arts and recreation programming for children is particularly inequitable, a concerning finding given the essential role these programs can have in developing critical cognitive and social skills for children. And those benefits apply to youth as well, from improving general well-being and mental health to building new friendships. School is more enjoyable, and naturally grades and graduation rates go up thanks to these kinds of programs. Historically, arts funding has flowed to the downtown core, although I know that Claire and her team have been making an enormous effort to change that in more recent years. Also from our vital signs report, we know that Toronto has almost twice as many workers in the arts, culture, and recreation than in Canada overall, not counting Vancouver and Montreal. And workers in these sectors make about half the income of the typical occupation in Toronto, and the least of any major city in Canada. That means that those who are working in the arts are living with high poverty rates, in unaffordable housing, and with extremely high rates of precarious work. This morning, we've gathered together several local experts who can shed some light on how COVID-19 is affecting community and culture, and by extension, the social cohesion of our city. So as we start today's discussion, let's all think about what we've been missing while physical distancing. And I want to just say how excited I am to actually be talking about arts and culture and parks and connection today, because I think we've been so focused in on COVID, not just Toronto Foundation, but the whole community on PPE and health and those things, which are all important. But our last session was on mental health. And I think there's such a huge connection between that work and the missing pieces in our lives right now, because the arts community has been so limited. So a reminder to those in the crowd that if you have questions for our speakers, don't hesitate to ask them right away in the chat. We will be collecting them. There may be others in the chat that will be able to answer your questions quicker, but we will have a Q&A at the end of this conversation. And I'm going to dive right in with a lovely young woman named Zahra Ebrahim, a special friend to the Toronto Foundation, one of our fund holders, but also the volunteer chair of Park People, and a professional urban planner who has made a name for herself, bringing an equity lens to the community consultation process. Welcome, Zahra. You're wearing a couple of hats on the call today. So let's start with a brief conversation about Park People and their services before COVID and now.
So Park People, first of all, thank you for having me. And I'm so excited to have this conversation as well. Park People is a national charity that organizes residents to really leverage the power of parks to build social cohesion and community in the places that they live, and ultimately to support the quality of life in cities across the country. It's been really interesting that, in conversations with our board and staff over the last few months, we've been talking about how really what we do is we teach people and support people to learn how to share space together in ways that meet the needs of more and lift us all. And so it's been really fascinating, as so many charities and organizations during this time have to think about how to pivot. Something we've been talking about at Park People is we really need to double down on our mandate because now more than ever, the idea of solidarity in parks and sharing for collective needs is really, really important. And I think a necessary education or boot camp that we need to be really getting out and having conversations about. So it's been fascinating to watch, and I'll talk more about this, but really our work focuses on finding, let me turn off my notifications here. Our work focuses on finding residents in their communities who are interested in organizing and engaging and supporting them with the resources needed to help them do that well. So it's been really, really fascinating to be connecting to grassroots leaders and residents and parks groups across the country who are repurposing their work, really focusing in on what it is they do, which is not events in parks. It's about giving people a sense of connection and a sense of belonging where they live. So it's been great to watch.
What encouraging practices have you heard about during this pandemic here and abroad?
Yeah, I mean, what's been interesting is that in some places around the world, in some parts of the United States, parks have been activities in parks have been deemed essential services. So you have open air markets in parts of the United States that are the safest way for people in underserved neighborhoods to get access to fresh food. So there's some real, here in Canada, there's been a ton of parks organizing around recognizing that traditional green space is not the only place that could be called a park, and that this is the moment to look at underutilized spaces across our city, things like parking lots that are not used right now because people aren't trafficking them as much, to convert them into spaces that could be used not only for recreation, but to meet needs for those most sort of hit, affected by the virus and the economic fallout of the virus. So how can you provide essential services through public spaces, not just use it as the third space that provides us respite, which is hugely, hugely important. In Montreal, what's been really interesting is they got ahead of the sort of hot weather. And I'm sure lots of people have been looking at the case from Trinity Bellwoods this weekend. But what they did was they got ahead and they organized, I think it was over 50 groups or 60 groups got together and worked with the city to make visible spaces that people wouldn't know were park spaces or part of the public realm that they could use, and to build a connectivity strategy so that all across the city, these places felt connected and they were visible. So there's been some really great, volunteer organizing by, and I know Ajeev's going to talk about this, so I'm not going to say too much, but, I really think that what's been fascinating is that so much of the organizing that we've seen, not only in parks, in all the other hats that I wear, the thing that I've seen is so much has been volunteer, independence, what the Toronto Foundation and philanthropic organizations would call non-qualified donees, and people who are doing this side of desk, side of life, and that's very true in the park space. I'll say one more thing, which is park people. With the support of a variety of foundations and partners, we deliver Park People Grants, the TD Park People Grants, to community organizations across the country to do their hyper-local work. And a lot of those organizations would not be able to do the work without this pipeline between us and them, because they wouldn't qualify for traditional philanthropic dollars, but they are really enhancing the social safety net at this moment. So it's really interesting to see how they're pivoting.
It's really, you've really touched on a hot button issue for funders too, Zahra, in terms of the limitations our own charitable status puts on us. And I think a great example of one of the post-COVID challenges that we'd like to make to the system of philanthropy, because I think tons of philanthropists would love to fund exactly what you're talking about, and we have got to find channels to get there. Absolutely. I want to ask you one more question very quickly, and it's not a quick question, but we we're on a tight timeline, but I have to ask this question. More Torontonians live in apartments than in single detached homes. What stories are you hearing from under-resourced communities and residents and abilities to access public spaces? You've touched a little on it, but can you give me an example?
Yeah, so one of my favorite stories has been MABELLEarts, which is here in the West End of Toronto, who's had these sort of long established and trusting connections with people within their community. And they quickly pivoted, their programming online, which was fantastic. And they had a series of iftar nights over the course of Ramadan. But what's been most fantastic is they've actually turned their connections across community members into a phone chain and a version of a mutual aid network pretty quickly. Thorncliffe Park was really similar. Sabina Ali, who some people might know, one of our great parks leaders and city builders in runs the Thorncliffe Park Women's Committee in RV Burgess Park, moved all of their Eid celebrations and their bazaar online and supported people to get online to be a part of it. It has been interesting. Folks who live in tower communities don't typically feel necessarily safe to go out in public space. We've seen, because of the violence certainly in the United States and the increased racism around citizen policing, that it's not always safe to go out in public space. So these park groups have been a vital asset in getting people out at times where, beyond just the fear of getting sick and the public health risks, are keeping people in their apartments and not giving them those opportunities to foster connection with others.
Of course. Thank you, Zahra. I could talk to you for ages. We'll come back to you at the end. And I'm going to move to Claire Hopkinson now, Director and CEO of Toronto Arts Council and Toronto Arts Foundation. So another woman wearing a few hats today. So nice to see you, Claire. And could you just start by quickly describing the roles of Toronto Arts Council and the Toronto Arts Foundation pre-COVID and now into the pandemic?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. And there's a few colleagues with me who I say welcome yourselves into the chat room and let everybody know you're there. So to put our work in context, as you know, the arts are a key part of the city's DNA and a significant part of our economy. And our research has demonstrated that 85% of Torontonians believe that the arts make Toronto a better place, with 65% of those believing because the arts reflect the diversity of this city. So Toronto Arts Council, these are two separate organizations with separate boards, and I'm the CEO of both, and we have crossover. Toronto Arts Council, with funding from the city, we fund the vast majority of the city's arts organizations, from some of our national treasures to some very small collectives and project groups. Also fund individual artists. We have been working with the foundation, our foundation, on a vision creative city block by block for the last number of years to expand access across the city, access to the arts across the city. But there are very few spaces for artists to do their work outside the downtown core and its infrastructure. So we've been partnering with libraries, with the TDSB, with small museums, and most importantly, with parks. And with the foundation, one of our largest projects is Arts in the Parks, where we produce around 300 events per summer across, mainly outside the downtown core. And we're delighted to work with park people on this so we can reach deep into community, working with community leaders to enliven local neighborhoods. So that's pre-COVID. Post, or now, in March, everything closed, from the concert halls to the smallest bars, which featured local artists, theaters, galleries, museums, community engaged art making workshops. And so in the not-for-profit sector alone, every month the cancellations number about 2,500 performances and exhibitions. And this is costing our arts organizations, which survive on a knife's edge, about $18.3 million in ticket sales alone. So if we were to project this loss out to the end of the year, which is quite possible, we're looking at $145 million lost in artist and production salaries. And these are, as you noted, Sharon, artists are very generally quite poor and don't have a lot of savings. Arts, because of the health and safety and social distancing, the arts are going to be one of the longest sectors to come back. So as of March, so many artists out of work, well-known names, no access to EI, earning, as you notice, less than half the wage of most Torontonians, very few savings. So we felt this absolute moral imperative to do something. So with our foundation, which normally works with the private sector to bring in money for awards, which we designed, to work with the Neighbourhood Arts Network, with our foundation, we set and launched a fund called the TO Artists COVID-19 Response Fund. And within 2 months, with some money from the foundation and money from the Toronto Arts Council, we were able to raise over $800,000. And we launched this fund, and within 2 months funded 982 artists who had proof of canceled gigs. And that was an immediate response, which we were so grateful to local Torontonians with small gifts and large to actually help artists directly so they could pay their rent and buy groceries. And this was before the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit kicked in. And this was an extraordinary work, I have to say, because we processed some 1,200 applications, and normally in a year we will fund nearly 1,000. So it was almost a year's worth of work in a few weeks. So at Toronto Arts Council, we're still continuing to fund our organizations without restrictions, but their grants are only about 6% of their overall budgets per year. This week, I'm delighted to say that the Hal Jackman Foundation stepped up, worked with us to deliver $1 million out to small and mid-sized arts organizations that really don't have the same level of access to donors as some of the large organizations. So we were able to help them show the scope of losses, and we were able to flow those funds out essentially within a week. We spent a couple of weeks designing exactly the process, and the money is flowing out this week. And again, speed is really important because the arts community and artists themselves are in very insecure financial situations. So we've been pivoting as quickly as we can to make sure that we are responding to the needs of the community as best we can. We know there's a lot more work to do. We really are intent on finding funds that help with organizations that are more equity priority groups or equity seeking groups, or non-qualified donees, which again have don't have as many opportunities to connect with donors as other more well-established organizations.
I want to just, for the sake of those in the audience, they've heard this idea of the non-qualified donee or the qualified donee a couple of times. It's a technical charity term for those that qualify to receive money that has been receipted, and is often a requirement of the CRA. And a limitation, I think we're going to hear from Ajeev too, that is very frustrating, because there are so many non-traditional but high social impact. There's so much non-traditional social high impact work going on. I almost said organizations, but it's not even that, is it, Zahra? I can see you nodding. It's individuals, it's grassroots, and it's artists, and it's art programs. And so we'll talk more about this near the end, because I think it's a really important discussion. Claire, one last question for you, a quick one on we've heard a lot of organizations moving online, and have you got some member organizations that have actually successfully shifted at least a portion of their arts work into the technology, the modernization, online world?
Well, it's quite remarkable because so many artists and arts organizations are jumping online. I could ream off a whole list, from Tapestry Opera to the TSO. Extraordinary work. Also education, giving you a deep insight into talks with directors or talks with playwrights. Dinner and theater with Crow's Theater, a full performance of House from Factory Theater, arts workshops online, dance classes, mental health meditation classes, food bank drives, as Zahra mentioned. And some organizations, like one example, very nice, Jammy in the Esplanade area of the city, is offering up nightly mobile theater, and people are encouraged to stay in their windows or balconies or come onto their doorsteps and enjoy some fantastic artists with this mobile theater as it passes by. Smile Theater regularly performs in for seniors in care, and they're offering a service where they phone people with a happy serenade, just to bring a bit of joy and to bring people out of isolation. And artists are doing really, really, really important work in this pandemic. And unfortunately, there's very few opportunities through the digital or through these other opportunities for them to make any money for their work. So that's a challenge we're trying to figure out how to address.
Well, I think what you've done for us, Claire, is remind us how critical the arts are to our quality of life in this city, and the passionate, selfless commitment of so many artists to bringing and sparking joy in people, and how important that's going to be, I think, as we come out the other side and start to reimagine our communities going forward. So thank you. We'll come back to Claire. We're going to chat now with Utcha Sawyers, the Executive Director of the Boys and Girls Club of East Scarborough. Welcome, Utcha. I'm so glad you're here. Please tell us about the East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club services before COVID and today.
Well, first, I'd like to thank you. Thank you so much for inviting us to this discussion, and say good morning, to everybody. No, we're not, we're used to physically seeing someone before we say good morning, but getting used to remembering everyone in the chat room and saying good morning. I think some things to highlight about the work that we do here in East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club is that this agency, this organization, this movement has been serving East Scarborough since 1968. This club has been a pillar in the foundation for many, many, many years. And don't let the name fool you, we serve children of all ages. Our programs, we like to say, really, really start from cradle to career, and it's gone beyond. We have a lot of seniors that use the space. In the days, we have partnerships with various agencies across Scarborough that we've built wonderful networks with to provide seamless services, yoga. For seniors, we do our digital literacy programs where they get savvy and learn to follow their children on Facebook and grandchildren. We operate out of 26 sites, so across East Scarborough, all the way from Kennedy and Eglinton to Port Union and I would say Shepherd. We are offering, anything from licensed childcare, early years learning. We also have youth outreach workers that are focused on youth crisis in the local community. We are formally known, and we do offer, a variety of recreational services to broader community, children and youth, to ensure that we use it as a tool for mentoring. Because of where we're located in the city, sorry, I thought I turned off all of the notifications. I must have missed one. But because of where we're located in the city, I'll share a bit about this particular community known as KGO, which is an acronym for Kingston Road, Galloway. And I want to include Galloway and Orton Park, but I want to include West Hill in that, in this as well. This is the city's a community with probably the highest, the highest population experiencing food insecurity. We have what it would be known as a food desert, where families, individuals, seniors, children, adults have to travel, on ridiculous, distances. Based on the layout of our community to get to a local grocery store that's affordable, which is very important to mention. Because of this, we have a lot of programs here that focus on, food literacy, eating nutrient-dense foods. We have a phenomenal partner that's spanning over 15 years with Second Harvest, and we lead the Harvest Kitchen in the east side of the city. And before COVID, we were working with Second Harvest to prepare, anywhere between 500 to 1,000 meals weekly that were delivered through various partners to those who need. Post-COVID, we have mobilized into virtual and food security mode. As of, we shut down formally as of our doors to the public at all of our sites, which, I want to mention the emotional heartbreak, that all of our staff experience with having to, take a break with their children, because the children we serve, we consider our children as well. And breaking with those families is a very emotional transition when we can't be in space publicly together. And so as of the week following the March break, which was the 23rd, because of our devotion and passion for the work that we do as a collective, we have a very phenomenal team here. Our early years department immediately prompted Zoom programming. And we were probably one of the first across the city because we supported a lot of other agencies to get their early learning programs online. And we started with a baby yoga class that we thought maybe 2 or 3 people, maybe 5 would attend. And we had 100-room capacity and had a waiting list. In fact, a colleague of mine in the West End was called to brag how she was able to access our programs, which naturally she would not have been able to living in the West End Mount Dennis area and we being in Scarborough, and how phenomenal they were. I think, post-COVID, we from the results in that week, we launched about 30 different programs within a 2-week span virtually to make sure that we were continuing the connections. We understand here at this space that our motto is that this is a good place to be, and we live that. We know that because this place is always full, and that is a whole new transition for us. Because we are essential, we're providing essential services, which I'll speak on shortly. There are a handful of us that are coming to the building regularly on a daily basis. And to not hear, the volume of the children and the pitter patter and the toilet flooding every week because somebody has stuck toilet paper in there thinking that it would be fun and creative. It's just, it's a culture shock for us, as a team leading this work. We also recognize, because we know who we work with, because we strive on having those personal bonds with the families, the children, and the youth that we work with. There are a variety of families, individuals that do not have access to internet or can't afford, their only internet access is perhaps their mobile phone, which has limits because of their ability to afford maybe unlimited or afford that package that allows them to surf and so on and so forth. So along with our services that we launched on the 30th of May, we were very, very intentional to look at the inequities that exist around access and ensure that along with the virtual programming for the weeks that would lay ahead, that we were also offering access to tangible learning kits, STEM kits, craft kits, hygiene kits that accompany our meal kits, weekly to the children, youth, and families that we serve, to ensure that though it is an additional hurdle and an additional crossroads to bear, experiencing the social isolation or the personal isolation that we're going through as a result of COVID, that at least in some way we were keeping connected and keeping our families in the loop, the family loop of those of East Scarborough. I'll speak quickly on our food security that has just ramped up. Post-COVID, we gave out a holiday hamper at the holidays during the winter solstice time. We actually last year expanded to doing it at Thanksgiving too, because we were seeing more of a need. We are now delivering hampers twice a week, weekly, and we've been doing so for the last 6 weeks. We've seen the need increase every week, and we're currently at capacity doing 500 families in the local area every week. These are full family meal kits that are intended to dent, the impact of the food insecurity that our families are facing with having to, dual house, the dual house own breadwinners in the home having no job, or a lot of our families are single parent families that were on fixed and regulated incomes and now facing additional gaps in their economic, positions at home. And there are, a whole new population that that have emerged of many seniors, many folks who are what are considered house poor. They may own a house, but they are living check to check to check to check. And to lose that your income and to be subsidized at perhaps a quarter of what you were making previously, food becomes the lower on the pole around what is a priority. And so we have evolved our relationship with the community through food. We've also introduced, reopened our Second Harvest Kitchen, maybe I want to say about 3-4 weeks ago. We've partnered, to scale up with Second Harvest to provide more than the meals that we were providing before. Anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 meals are being prepared every week. All of our programs are delivery service, so we have no one coming to the site because we do take the health risk pieces very seriously, and we want to ensure the health of our staff as well as the health of other individuals, and make sure that access, that the programs and the services are accessible. And so through a donation, a partnership with Hyundai, we were able to double our fleet so that we are able to have, I believe it's 7 or 8 vehicles on the road daily that are delivering food across East Scarborough. And I can share that this need has just been growing and growing every single week. If I could lift my computer and show you our gym, it's been filled like the holidays with food. And that food is destined to go out in this 1 week. And it's been every week that there's, been a need. And so,
Can I jump in? I just want to jump in because I need to acknowledge what I'm sure everyone who has joined us today is thinking, which is holy crap. And it's interesting in terms of your ability as a small organization, relatively speaking, to adapt so much change for so much need. I just need to congratulate you for that. I'm seeing a lot of congratulations going by in the chat. And I want to say one more thing, and I'm not being a very good timekeeper here today, but there's so much good to talk about. I want to say to my funders on this call that I obsess over the statistics. 66% of all donation revenue in this country goes to only 1% of the charities, and I often hear from my donors and funders, well, if I haven't heard of them, or, how can I trust a small organization to do good work? Utcha, you are why we should trust.
That's
right? You are why we should be looking harder as donors for opportunities to fund fantastic leadership and just adaptability and compassion, and I could go on and on. So thank you for that. Congratulations under the circumstances, and thank you. I want to make sure we get Ajeev in here, Utcha. So I'm gonna move to Ajeev, but we'll bring you all back together for questions at the end, because I know there are a fair number of them piling up on my phone already. So Ajeev, so lovely to have you here. Ajeev is the manager of Community Policy Connections at the Center for Connected Communities, a similar community actually to where Utcha is right now as well. And Ajeev warns us that 1 or 2 cats may join us on this call at some point in this conversation. And I know, because we've been really talking, so Utcha took us really tangible, Claire took us really broad, Zahra took us to this place of equity and space. But you're the policy guy on this call, Ajeev, and we actually haven't had a ton of policy folks here, but you are also clearly about connecting communities and people, and the people that are actually experiencing the issues of the city and making sure their voice is heard. So can you talk a little bit about C3 before and during the pandemic? And then I do want to get into this non-qualified donee thing. So
Me too.
You just get going there, mister.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thanks, Toronto Foundation, for convening. Center for Connected Communities is a community development strategy organization. We've been around for a couple of years, but our work is rooted in the 2 decades of community development practice of the East Scarborough storefront, located in KGO, the neighborhood Utcha referred to. And so we have pioneered an approach to community development called the connected community approach, which is basically neighborhoods in Toronto are ecosystems. So we take a system view to neighborhoods. And so we know that there are residents, grassroots leaders, local folks who run programs, social service organizations, anchor institutions, employers, and government policy. All of these things intersect and take place in neighborhoods. And so the way in which they interface with communities is create implications for people who live there. And there are many people in neighborhoods who are advancing local priorities, but may or may not be necessarily aligned because they don't know each other exist, or because they are not facilitated collaboratively to work together to advance multiple priorities simultaneously. So when I say we're a community development strategy organization, we are not the community developers, because we are not of the neighborhoods we work in. We support neighborhoods to develop strategy, to work collectively from a system view to advance priorities. Some of those priorities for our work related pre-COVID has been around place-based workforce development. So I'm a planner as well. And so the geographic poverty that exists in Toronto and Toronto suburbs, which I referred to some of that in Scarborough. I grew up, was born and raised in the Kingston Gallery Warden Park neighborhood, lived experiences with a lot of those challenges. So these kind of, so place-based workforce development is a strategy that recognizes that poverty is geographic in Toronto, and our neighborhood improvement areas in the city have very dense poverty. Line that up with race, right? Our neighborhoods are racially segregated. Our commute times to work for our inner suburban communities are over an hour. If you look at the choropleth map of all of these things, it's really, you see the downtown core very, all of these issues don't really exist. And then you look at the inner suburbs and you see how dense it all is. Just wanted to quickly refer to the map that was put up yesterday by the city on the spread of COVID. And it pointed out exactly that the inner suburbs are, again, where the spread is the most because of these kind of underlying structural inequities that exist. So place-based workforce development connects people locally to local employment opportunities and works with an employment ecosystem from employment service training organizations, grassroots leaders, and unions and employers to connect local people to local jobs. So we've been working on that on economic development. We've been working on a community-based resilience strategy. So there's the formal response when shocks occur in communities, climate-related, violence-related, and health-related. And then there's the informal response, those grassroots organizers. And by grassroots, we define them and talk about them as autonomous agents of change located in neighborhoods across the city who are advancing priorities, who are oftentimes invisible because they don't have websites, they don't have charitable status. They are what we refer to as non-qualified donees, but they are rooted in neighborhoods in Toronto. They have a history of advancing neighborhood priorities, and they are what I call the aortic artery of our city. They are the one, an aortic artery is the one of the largest vessels that pump blood through our left ventricle and our heart towards all of the networks and blood networks in our body. This is who our grassroots leaders are. They are the aortic artery. They are the glue that really binds our neighborhoods together. And when we talk about community development, they are at the heart of it. And so another big part of the work that Center for Connected Communities does is we coordinate a network of these autonomous grassroots leaders. We basically convene them and support them to continue to do the work they're already doing in their neighborhoods. And so that network that Toronto Foundation knows really well and has been a big supporter of is the Local Champions Network. And a part of that is, and so they are doing work now, I'll talk more about that later on, in responding to COVID. And they will be involved ideally in the recovery as well if the systems and the policy folks who are making decisions authentically and meaningfully engage them. And so Shape My City is one website that you can go online right now and see how local champions are responding to COVID in real time. What we're doing now is kind of in the face of COVID, these strategies around economic development rooted on inequity and poverty reduction, these strategies on community-based resilience, and on supporting grassroots leaders and local champions to advance their priorities have never been more relevant. in the face of COVID and the recovery efforts. So we're looking at what place-based workforce development and the geographic nature of poverty in the city looks like from an economic recovery perspective, and how the city of Toronto can be advancing and leveraging public infrastructure projects and investment that are already taking place in our neighborhood improvement areas, and creating a coordinated pathway so that people living in poverty in our NIAs are connected to those employment opportunities, so we can hit the ground running for an economic recovery model for the city. Community-based resilience, we've been hearing that the grassroots leaders have not been engaged effectively in the formal, in the response to COVID generally. And so the formal response is happening and they're doing a tremendous job at it, but there's a whole bunch of informal stuff that's happening as well. Folks are organizing food systems and food drives. Folks are creating face shields. Folks are trying to inform networks of what community priorities are, the existing networks, and trying to help guide them on how they should be supporting those neighborhoods and the unique context that exists within them. And so a community-based resilience strategy now is, right, how do we connect grassroots leaders to the formal response structures that exist, so that the recovery and response efforts reflect the local context of the neighborhoods in which that formal response is taking place. And so we're supporting and working with local champions on, they're already doing a whole bunch of great work. We're just trying to amplify the work that they're doing and letting people know that there's a whole bunch of folks who can't receive funding because of settler philanthropy and the system that's been designed that requires you to be a registered donee, qualified donee. But there's a whole bunch of grassroots people right now who are doing incredible work on the front lines, who are not being recognized for the work that they're doing, for the risk that they're putting themselves at stake, to be that front-facing information, knowledge sharing, coordinating people in that neighborhood. And they're there, and the informal systems that exist that are responding have not been doing a great job in engaging them.
Ajeev, thank you. I always love your passion. And this is, everyone who's in the room can know this is why Toronto Foundation has been a big supporter of C3 over the years. And I will just say, having been sitting on some of the conversation city panels for the post-COVID world, this is exactly the issue we raised, which is, you shouldn't be asking me, the white girl from the privileged foundation. I'm not the one that needs to tell you what the answer is for rebuilding the city post-COVID. Aruna, can I get everyone, Aruna's from our team, back on the screen, and let's have a conversation. I want to also say something about this qualified donee issue, which is a real thing. And I want to actually suggest something maybe surprising to those that are donors and funders on this call. And it's a question I would like you to leave today thinking about, which is, we know from research that a tax receipt is very rarely the motivation for giving to something. And though I work in an environment where those things are required of me legally, I would challenge those of you on the call who are thinking of diversifying, shall we say, your giving portfolio, to consider partnering without any tax benefit to you, no strings attached, gifts through these various networks of grassroots leaders. I think that would be fascinating experience as a donor, and because you wouldn't be a donor, you'd be an investor. And I think there's a whole new branch, I'm just saying to my whole team here, in our new philanthropy conversation that says, what's the traditional stuff that is going to go on because it's going to go on? And then what's the stuff that we could be connecting and encouraging that doesn't come through us, that just creates a bridge relationship between some of this fantastic work that's happening that won't give you a tax receipt, but boy, it will change your city. And I love that idea of the aortic. This is why I'm not in health. The heart, the blood flow of our city being deeply impacted. And so I think this is a bigger conversation than the 10 minutes we have left. And I know there were a few questions that came up that were quite specific, but I would like to ask all of our panelists one question and ask each of them to answer it as sort of in a certain amount of crispness. We have 7 minutes. And that is something we've started talking about in our last few sessions, which is about the recovery, if there is such a thing from COVID. And the words people are using, like equitable recovery or a just recovery, and what you think that looks like. Maybe it's something that we're taking from the learning at this time and going forward with. And so I'll start with Zahra, go to Claire, then Utcha, then and let Ajeev have the final word on that.
Great. I've so many things to say, so I'm going to try and keep it brief. You know, I think that one of the things that we saw this weekend with Trinity Bellwoods as an example was, you know, people can say many things, but I think it's about collective consciousness and solidarity that we need to be reminding people of, that we are not just in it for ourselves right now, that the collective good is what matters. And so I really do think that, you know, the federal government has tried putting a gender lens on policy and all these different sort of approaches. But if you're familiar with gender-based analysis, and I have tons of critiques of it, but what I will say is I really would like an equity-based analysis on the recovery and to try and think about everyone struggling, but let's focus on those who have been disproportionately affected first. And that specifically means in policy and funding interventions. It does, you know, we want everyone to rise up together, but I do think when we think about advocacy around policy priorities, to think about those who were already unaffected and experiencing sort of the worst impacts of the structural inequities in our cities. And let's focus policies first there, because there's sort of been there has been a doubling down, and the divide has been made more vast. I heard a term this week called purple lining, which was sort of an extension of the redlining movement in the United States, which was looking at policies that are focusing on just restoring existing policy agendas, like policymakers and urbanists saying, oh, hey, we need more bike lanes. Oh, hey, we need more. And it's a way of advancing agendas that were already there instead of fundamentally interrogating those agendas. And so I just, what I'll say is that, you know, I'm just getting to know the term. So, but I think it was really fascinating because we should be geographically, to Ajeev's point and so many other points made today, we should be really looking at where, you know, we're so impressed with where policies are getting accelerated. Let's look more closely at where they're directly impacting and who they're for. And that is a responsibility of us as citizens with privilege, as settlers with privilege, to be really paying more attention to if we have that capacity.
Thank you. Claire.
So I think a critical component of recovery and building is going to be building public trust. And a lot of that's going to be done on the local level. So being able to fund local grassroots arts organizations to connect with community is going to be a big part of rebuilding that trust. We've been talking a lot about how the issue of equity and inclusion and how we don't lose some of the gains that we've made in the last number of years. And how we are going to focus some of our funding as we develop the funds towards equity-seeking groups and those groups who are culturally diverse. And I wanted to say about non-qualified donees, because so many organizations and arts organizations in particular, which have come up more recently, have fewer, they don't have the kind of donor circle that more established organizations have, which is where we can come to help, because funds donated to our Toronto Arts Foundation can then partner with the Toronto Arts Council. We can design the program, the grant program, where we can then deliver the funds. So we can handle both, if you know what I mean. So we're really, really focused and committed to accelerating the priorities to equity-seeking groups, to diverse communities, expressing themselves through the voices of artists. So this city can reflect itself through their voices and bring more community connections after this pandemic is over, or while we're in the recovery from this pandemic, as we reconnect with each other.
Thank you, Claire. Utcha.
Everything that's been said, so much in alignment with, and I think in the world that we live in here at ESBGC, the reality of policy reform is only effective when it comes into practice. And we work and we grow and we support a community that is always constantly and consistently the most marginalized and the most overlooked and experience multi-layers in inequities. And I think if anything, COVID has given us an isolation to reflect on how all of the issues that were previously existing, and many of us that work in the sector know are a challenge, especially when we look at getting resources to do the work that we do. And I hope that post-COVID, or the world with COVID now, that as we rebuild, that we are very, very aware of the need to ensure that the policy and the shift in social consciousness that we're all experiencing makes us more holistic thinkers in our approach and how we do our work and how we resource that work. Because there are a lot of, as grassroots workers and agencies to long-standing agencies like ours that have been doing this work for a long time, and it seems more and more that we're having to jockey against each other and fight for these resources, when the reality is that we are serving those who are the most impacted by various inequities and this COVID change. So again, policy into practice is really what I want to drive home, and we can't do that practice without being visible and resourced by those who are committed to making change in the world.
Thank you, Utcha. And I think that's a great segue to our last comment from Ajeev. You have 60 seconds, Ajeev.
Okay, well, I'll say that we need to be so bold. We need to take risks like we haven't taken risks before. We have some of the world's most powerful nations injecting liquidity into our capital markets like we've never seen in history. They will do what's necessary to keep us afloat. Why aren't we doing what's necessary to keep the work of our aortic arteries afloat? Why aren't we doing what we need to do to take risks and maybe fail fast and learn hard? I think a lot of people are asking questions about how to support grassroots groups practically. Shared platforms is a model that's been effective. Tides Canada is a shared platform. ONN has released a guidebook on how to do on what shared platforms are. Neighbourhood Trust in East Scarborough was a model of practicing it that had its successes and its failures, but it's a great report that's online that you can find. Shared platforms is a practical way to support grassroots groups in the city. It has a track record of doing that. We're seeing some of the biggest, a really big funder in the province not recognize shared platforms anymore as a mechanism to fund grassroots groups. And so we're taking steps back at a time where we need bold action now more than ever. So I think we need to be able to take risk, especially those of us with privilege. We're seeing the inequities of our society exacerbated in so many painful ways. The anti-Black racism that we're seeing right now is so painful to see. It's on full display. We need to take bold action. If the private sector and if the central bank can announce infinite liquidity into our capital markets, we can do what needs to be done to support our social and cultural cohesion.
Well, I can't think of a better group to have had this conversation with this morning. I am so grateful to all four of you for stepping outside what is already busy lives to share so candidly with us your thoughts and opinions and your incredible passion for what we talked about today. Thank you for. I'm going to wrap up very quickly with a few important updates. First, I always like to thank Van City Investment Bank because there are many players that make societies run, and And they are the ones that launched this program with us 8 webinars ago, gave us the technology and the funding to start the Better Toronto Coalition. So I want to thank them. I want to remind those that are on the phone from organizations that we launched last week. The Emergency Community Support Fund. I know the team, I think, has been posting in chat the details on that. It is a lot of money. We will be running rolling applications weekly. These are undesignated contributions to support organizations in the sector who are supporting vulnerable populations. Please, please, please apply. The grant sizes are 10K to 75K, and will be, our goal is to have it all spent by the end of July. It's $5.1 million in grants. So please, please, folks, apply. And for the funders on the call, share the link to this program with the charities you support. They are, I admit, traditional donees. And so I don't want to end today without acknowledging that I think we've started a much bigger conversation here about, I think the language you used, Ajeev and Zahra, was settler philanthropy. And I think, wow, there's a bold term that maybe we should talk about a bit more within our family of community foundations, and certainly with our funders. Our next webinar is June 11th, Thursday, June 11th, same time, same place. We're going to talk about climate and the environment. I think we see a lot of possibilities in, I saw the cover of The Economist was crushing the climate curve. I think a lot's to be learned in that session. I thank you all for joining us. I wish you good health and connectivity, and being connected to your loved ones, whoever they are, through this time. Thank you, and good morning. Goodbye, everybody.